Well. All right. We still here in the shop because of the wind. It's rather cold. And I wanted to sit in here rather than be out there. I would like to just have done a walk and talk through the woods talking about this issue. But since conditions do not allow that, and it would be very unintelligent to walk around in the wind and try to talk into this microphone, I'm going to sit here in the shop. This video will not be comprehensive. It will be a 10,000 foot view. I don't want to get bogged down in minutia, but I think there's just a plague of lack of understanding about both of these diseases. And I wanted to throw a little bit of information out there that I've learned over the years to try to refute all of the false prophets that talk about both. And this is going to be all fact to the best of my ability. There will be some opinion. Most of my opinions I have kept to myself until now, except for a few people that I've worked with and know well. But first, let's talk about epizootic hemorrhagic disease. All right. EHD, common name, and people get this mixed up, but basically you just call it blue tongue. Okay. There's 7 different strains of these sister viruses in North America. There's one more abroad. But there are 7 strains. And depending on which strain comes through that year, that dictates deer mortality. In the deep south, deer are more resistant to it than they are in the Midwest and the North. We'll get there in a minute, okay? Hemorrhagic disease causes, obviously, hemorrhaging. It causes lesions around the oral area, blood flow issues, hence blue tongue. There are, like I said, 7 different serotypes or strains of the viruses. And the most important takeaway is this, and I want you to remember this, is that EHD is caused by a virus. That means it can die. All right. So that is crucial. And as that virus population ebbs and flows through time over the years, that dictates who's resistant to what and who dies. In the deep south, a heavy mortality to EHD is 10 to 20%. So it kills a few, but it's not anything to write home about. It's just another dead deer. God put them here for us to hunt them and enjoy them. So put that over here. And it gets up north and gets into the Midwest, like Ohio and maybe West Virginia this year. Kansas had them a real bad outbreak EHD back in the mid-2000s. It rim-wrecked them. It tore them out the frame. They can lose upwards of 50% up there. It's a thing. All right. EHD shows up in late summer as it gets dry. It's carried by a little midge. I call them dog pecker gnats. And it's in the genus Culicoides. And you'll have some interaction with them in late summer and early fall. 2 different responses to EHD. Acute EHD, deer with acute EHD do not act sick. They act dead. They die within 36, 48 hours. Chronic EHD that persists and they just remain sick, I usually down here get over it. They can have secondary infection from some of the lesions. It causes a high fever, and they go to water. Bow hunters typically find them around creeks and ponds and such in September, maybe even late August, when they're out scouting before bow season. So that's usually when they find the carcasses, and they're around water because of the high fever. The high fever also interrupts the hoof growth, and their hooves will look like a fingernail that you smashed with the hammer when you were driving a nail. So they'll slough off their hooves, and looking at hoof sloughing after you harvest a deer is a telltale sign, the presence of it. It's a telltale sign that they were exposed to EHD. The beauty of EHD, the good news with EHD, is that it is cyclical. So it's not an every year persistent, permanent thing. It goes in cycles. They build up, then they have a higher population. EHD, a new strain of EHD comes through, it knocks them back down a little bit. Okay, so it's cyclical, depending on the strain that they're not resistant to and the deer density. Okay, so you can put that over here. One other thing I wanted to talk about real quick, the EHD. The EHD is carried by the little gnats in the genus Culicoides, and they're very prevalent late summer, early fall. But the other good thing about EHD is once you have a frost, the little gnats go in, they're done, and the transmission of the disease stops. So yes, it's cyclical, and once you have a frost, EHD blue tongue basically ceases because the disease vector is dead. So there's that. Chronic wasting disease. The infectious agent of chronic wasting disease is not a virus, it's not a bacteria. It's a misfolded protein called a prion. And it is very real. And I'll talk about some of the naysayers at the end, and I'll discuss why they may or may not have all the information. I heard a guy on a podcast say that all of the science about CWD was misinformation. And you have naysayers out there spreading stuff that's false. Okay. CWD does kill deer. The prions accumulate in the brain. They accumulate in the lymph nodes. The most practical test is to test the two retropharyngeal lymph nodes right here under the jawbone. The lymph nodes that swell up and hurt when you get sick. The same ones that you test on a deer for CWD. The prions accumulate in the brain. They trigger other proteins near it to misfold, and it eats spongy holes in the brain. That's why it's classified a TSE. Transmissible. It's very transmissible. Spongiform, because it eats spongy holes in the brain. Encephalopathy, which is just a catch-all brain disease group. TSE, transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. Kind of like CTE in football players, but CTE is not transmissible. It's the same general concept. It's chronic trauma encephalopathy. Boxers and football players get it from getting bludgeoned about the head constantly. Wonder I don't have it. Hopefully I won't get it from my football career. But at any rate, CWD is different than bovine spongiform encephalopathy or mad cow, because cattle catch mad cow from ingesting feed with crushed up bone as a filler. So you're feeding an herbivore, carnivore diet. All right. And cattle basically have to commit cannibalism to catch mad cow. You pull the bone filler out of the feed, it goes away. And it's not transmissible. CWD is transmissible by urine, feces, saliva, blood, and semen. Hence, shipping semen between high fenced enclosure breeding pens has a tendency to be a really bad idea. But I digress. A deer can have CWD and shed prions for up to 18 to 24 months before they turn clinical and begin the process of dying. Becoming clinical is usually related to a late summer stress or a winter stress, late winter stress. All right. Something triggers them becoming clinical, probably body condition, and it's ball game at that point. CWD is 100% fatal. There are genotypes of deer that can live longer with it. Elk can live longer with it. Mule deer, you whisper to them and they get it and they die. That's why CWD was considered a disease of mule deer for the longest. So take that, put that over here. CWD has been found in scrapes using RT quick test. It's persist into the environment. CWD is not cyclical. So the problem with CWD is that the infectious agent is not alive. So you can't kill it. 98, 95% of the biological material has to be destroyed in order to render the infectious agent non-infectious anymore. It is very permanent. Once you get above 25, 27% prevalence, it's killing up to 19% of the population at that point every year. So that's offsetting hunting. At 10% prevalence, it persists in the environment. It's in the soil, it's in the plants, it's in the water. So that is a reason that we should be encouraging people to test and try to find the disease early before the prevalence gets too high in the environment that area is contaminated by the disease. There was a study last couple of years over in Arkansas in the hot zone. And we can kind of match that up to Benton and Marshall County, Mississippi, above Highway 72. These landowners in Benton County, the first year or two they had CWD. I think that was back 1920. They were seeing some deer. Didn't see a big difference. And like many people, they thought, well, there's nothing to this. It's a fraud. It's a scam. You fast forward 5 to 7 years, and it's very different. In deer season 23-24, there was one landowner up in Benton County that I've had some information from. First year or two with CWD, he's seeing 12, 15 deer hunt. Big whoop. You combine a fairly significant hemorrhagic disease year with a prevalence of near 30% in the standing crop of CWD. 23-24, 24-25, he was seeing 3 deer the entire deer season. So a healthy deer herd can overcome a hemorrhagic disease outbreak that kills several. But when you couple that with fawns catching CWD in utero from the dam, from the doe, and they only live a year and a half, 2 years, they can't overcome it. In Arkansas, they had in the hot zone, after a very rigorous University of Georgia study, 1.5 deer per square mile. And yeah, we can blame the elk. We don't have elk here, and that elk and deer really don't compete for groceries, but the elk probably did introduce CWD. and then it basically wiped out the whitetails in that county. You move out several miles from that hot zone, and you're looking at a whopping 5 deer per square mile. This is the information that people just don't have access to because they don't want to do the research. How many 150s you gonna grow at a deer and a half per square mile? How many 150s you gonna grow at 5 and a 5.6 deer per square mile? Are you gonna have any deer to hunt? No. And the biggest problem with this disease is in the beginning. You need people to continue hunting to try to get ahead of it. Get the density down. Sharpshooting works, especially in a Midwest landscape. But the problem is you go in and wipe them all out. It's egg on your face then as a state agency. And it still spreads because it spreads with yearling buck dispersal. And let's face it, you can't kill them all. You can reduce the density and try to slow the spread. You can do away with feeding and baiting, slow the spread, but it's still going to move. So, state agencies encourage people to shoot more deer in the beginning, and they have to. And then as the prevalence increases and it's killing as many deer as hunting is, they have to throttle people back off of harvest in order to have a few deer left to live with the disease as best they can till it gets to that 1.5 deer per square mile number, and then it's basically ball game. The naysayers, I understand where some of this comes from. The biggest problems with CWD are two things. It is life-changing, and it is easy to try to thumb your nose and say, I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing for 30 years. This disease requires us to change, and there ain't nobody that hates change more than this old boy right here. I absolutely hate it with a passion. Generally, it hadn't been good for me, but some of it has. Unfortunately, there is no real good silver lining with CWD other than this. The possible solutions are these handful of things. If you can catch it early and say you shoot a positive doe, instead of wiping out all the deer in that immediate area, just go shoot the family group that doe was living with, because all of that family group's going to have it anyway. At the point that you do find that you have it, it's probably most intelligent to start taking as many bucks as you can, especially older bucks. Because an older buck age structure, unfortunately, is a breeding ground for the disease because they move it around between family groups of does. Bucks interact with a lot more deer than the family groups of does do. Family groups of does just kind of stay to themselves. But a buck comes in and he wants to bed down with mama, and I won't blame him. I derive great pleasure and satisfaction out of that too. But a buck's going to show up. He's going to do his work. He's going to give at least one deer in the family group the disease, and then they're going to groom each other and this and that and interact, and then everybody's going to get it. So try to remove the older buck age structure when you pop positive, or if you pop positive. And then as you get positive does, try to go strategically remove those family groups. If you haven't, please stand down on feeding and baiting, please, because it just accelerates it. And I've seen it too many times. I've worked with a couple of properties. One never fed. It was 1,900 acres here in my home county, but daylight deer movement was spectacular on this place. They had good habitat, had a rigorous food plot program, and they did not feed. And it was a spectacular place to hunt. Had another property I worked with over on the Mississippi River. It was a very large property to the tune of 8,000 acres. And I understand that most of the small landowners are wanting to throw tomatoes at me, but hear me out. This property was feeding, and then they voted to stop, which, I gave them. But they stopped, and their daylight movement tripled and or quadrupled. They began to see significantly more deer in daylight without feeding. So I say that to say is if there's any way on a larger scale among several properties, some of you can make a handshake gentleman's agreement to stop feeding for 1 year and try it, you will probably see a difference. With that, I'm going to summarize with this. EHD is caused by a virus. The virus dies. It is cyclical, depending on the strain that impacts the deer herd that year. CWD is like a diamond. You can't kill the infectious agent because it's not alive. It's a misfolded protein. And CWD is indeed 100% fatal, and it is very permanent. What we can try to do as a solution is to try to slow it down, buy ourselves some time, and perhaps science can find a way to beat it. So there's a difference. Hopefully my rambling was not incoherent. And again, I appreciate everybody. And I'll be doing another on sociological impacts of CWD. Thank you.